Emma woke early, as she always did, to the quiet hum of the heater and the faint light pushing through the curtains. Her mornings rarely changed. She would brew her coffee, sit at the small wooden table by the window, and let her mind drift while the world outside slowly came alive. The maple trees in the yard still held the last of autumn's colors, and the crisp Vermont air reminded her that winter was near. Everything about that morning seemed familiar, yet she could not shake the feeling that something was different. She stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, listening for the sound of footsteps upstairs. Her son Daniel had always been predictable. He would come down dressed neatly for work, grab a quick bite, flash a hurried smile, and then disappear through the front door. Emma loved his routine, but she also knew it left little room for real conversation. She had grown used to the silence that lingered between them, kind of silence that wasn't unfriendly but still carried weight. That morning, however, she noticed it before she even saw him pause. Daniel's steps slowed as he came down the stairs, as though he was hesitating before facing her. Emma set her cup down, her heart giving an odd flutter she couldn't explain. When he finally appeared in the doorway, she saw it in his face at once. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't distracted. His eyes, steady and calm, found hers as though he had been waiting for this very moment. Emma straightened in her chair. She had lived with Daniel all his life, and she knew every shade of his expressions. But this was new. There was no casual smile, no playful remark. His face carried an honesty that unsettled her, the kind of look that seemed to peel away all the small talk they usually relied on. "Morning," she said softly, trying to break this strange silence. "Morning, Mom," Daniel replied, but his voice was different too. It carried a weight that tugged at her chest. Instead of moving quickly to the counter or grabbing his keys, he stood still, studying her with a quiet intensity. Emma's fingers curled against the table. She felt exposed under his gaze, as though he could see past the mask she wore every day. She wanted to ask what was wrong, but something in her told her to wait. So she did. Finally, Daniel moved into the kitchen. But instead of rushing to prepare his breakfast, he walked slowly to the chair across from her and sat down. Emma blinked, startled. He never sat with her in the mornings, not like this. She tried to act calm, but inside her heart was racing. What was happening? Why was he breaking their routine? Daniel leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the table. His expression softened, but it remained steady, unwavering. Emma caught her breath. His eyes, blue like his late father's, were filled with something she hadn't seen in years. Unguarded honesty. It wasn't the look of a man in trouble, nor the look of a child needing comfort. It was deeper than that. It was the look of someone who had carried words for too long and was finally ready to set them free. Emma felt her throat tighten. Her life had been steady but lonely ever since her husband passed. She had poured everything into raising Daniel, keeping the house together, and moving forward without letting grief consume her. She thought she had done well at hiding the emptiness that sometimes crept in late at night when the house was quiet. She thought no one noticed. But now, looking at her son, she wondered if he had seen through her all along. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. The smell of coffee lingered in the air, but Emma no longer tasted it. Her entire focus was on Daniel. On the way, his presence seemed to change the very atmosphere of the kitchen. He didn't speak yet. He just sat there, watching her with a kind of patience that unnerved her. Emma clasped her hands together to keep them from trembling. She wanted to fill the silence with words, but for once, she didn't. She let it stretch between them, heavy and meaningful, waiting for him to be the one to break it. And then, in that silence, she realized something. This was not just another morning. This was the moment before something important, something she had not expected and was not prepared for. Daniel's honest expression carried the weight of change. Whatever he was about to say, she knew it would shift the quiet balance of their lives. Emma's heart pounded as she looked into her son's eyes, waiting for the words that seemed to hover on his lips. She didn't know what was coming, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life would not be the same after this morning. Daniel leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his fingers woven tightly together as if he needed the strength of that small gesture to hold steady. Emma had never seen him this way before. He had always been strong, confident, sure of himself in every decision. Yet now, sitting across from her, he looked like a man stripped down to his truest self. "Mom," he began, his voice quiet, almost careful. "I need to say something, and I don't want you to brush it off this time." Emma's pulse quickened. She wanted to interrupt to tell him he didn't need to worry, but the seriousness in his tone silenced her. She nodded once, her eyes fixed on his. "You've been there for me my whole life," he continued, his gaze steady. "You gave up so much for me. You worked long hours, carried the weight of everything after Dad passed, and you never once complained. You always told me you were fine. But, Mom, I don't think you are." Emma's breath caught in her throat. The words pierced deeper than she expected. She opened her mouth to deny it, but Daniel raised his hand gently, asking her to let him finish. "I watch you," he said, his voice soft but sure. "Every morning, every night. You smile, you cook, you clean, you ask about my day. But when you think no one's looking, I see it. I see the loneliness in your eyes. I see how you sit in that chair by the window after dinner, staring at the world outside as if you're waiting for something. Or someone." Her hands trembled slightly in her lap. She hadn't thought he noticed. She had believed she was strong enough to hide it all the empty evenings. The quiet nights where she longed for a voice beside hers, for laughter that filled the house again. Daniel leaned closer. "You don't have to pretend with me. I know you're not just my mother. You're a woman who deserves love, who deserves happiness, and I can't stand by and let you bury that part of yourself." Emma swallowed hard, her throat dry. No one had spoken to her like this in years. Friends had offered sympathy after her husband's passing. Neighbors had checked in, but no one had looked at her so directly and told her she deserved more. And the fact that it was her son saying it made it all the more overwhelming. She whispered, almost without realizing it, "Daniel, why are you telling me this?" His eyes softened. "Because you've given me everything, Mom. You've made sure I had a life, a future, a chance to build my own happiness. But you," his voice cracked for the first time, "you've stopped living for yourself. I can't carry the thought that I took all your years, all your joy, and left you with nothing but memories." Emma felt tears sting her eyes. She shook her head quickly. "No, Daniel, you've never taken anything from me. You're my greatest joy." "I know," he said firmly, "and I'll always be grateful for that. But loving me doesn't mean you have to forget yourself. I want you to have more. I want you to wake up with a reason to smile. Not just because I'm here, but because your heart feels alive again." The words hung in the air, heavy and gentle all at once. Emma pressed her hands to her chest as if to steady the emotions swirling inside her. Her son's honesty felt like sunlight breaking through clouds she had grown used to living under. She wasn't sure whether to feel grateful, ashamed, or simply undone. Daniel's expression was so tender that it almost broke her. He wasn't scolding her. He wasn't lecturing. He was pleading in the only way a son who loved his mother could. The silence between them grew thicker. But it wasn't empty. It was filled with the weight of everything unspoken over the years, her buried dreams, his quiet observations. The unacknowledged truth that their home had been steady but not whole. Emma finally spoke, her voice trembling. "I thought it was too late. I thought life had already given me my story, and all that was left was to watch you live yours." Daniel shook his head, his jaw firm. "No, Mom, your story isn't over. You taught me to believe in possibility, to never give up on what matters. How can you teach me that and then not believe it for yourself?" Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She wanted to argue, but the fire in his eyes stopped her. It wasn't anger, it was love. Fierce, protective love that wanted more for her than she had dared to want for herself. The clock ticked on the wall, each second stretching the space between them. Emma could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. She felt exposed, as if her son had seen the pages of her private journal. The secret hope she had hidden under layers of responsibility. Her voice broke when she finally whispered, "I don't know if I remember how to dream like that anymore. Daniel reached across the table, his hand covering hers with warmth and certainty. "Then let me remind you," he said quietly. "Let me remind you that you're not just surviving. You're meant to feel, to hope, to love again. And I'll keep saying it until you believe me." Emma's tears finally slipped free, rolling down her cheeks. She didn't try to hide them. She let herself cry, not out of sadness, but from the shocking relief of being seen. Her son's confession wasn't a burden, it was a gift. A gentle truth wrapped in kindness, laid bare in the quiet of their kitchen, in that moment. Emma realized this was the beginning of something new. She didn't know where it would lead or how long it would take. But one thing was certain. She could no longer pretend her heart was asleep. And as she looked at Daniel's steady, loving face, she felt something stir inside her, fragile, hesitant but real, a spark of hope. The morning light stretched across the table, spilling in through the kitchen window. But Emma hardly noticed. Her son's words still echoed in her mind, shaking the foundation of the quiet life she had built. Daniel sat across from her, his expression calm, but his eyes burning with something she could not name. She felt like a woman caught at the edge of a cliff, unsure if she was about to fall or finally learn how to fly. Daniel leaned forward, his hands pressed together as though bracing himself. "Mom," he said slowly, "there's something I need to ask you. Something I've been carrying for a long time." Emma's heart skipped a beat. His voice was steady, but beneath it was urgency, almost fear. She wanted to tell him not to scare her, to just say it. But the weight in his tone kept her silent. "Are you happy?" he asked. Emma blinked, startled by the simplicity of the question. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Of course, But she stopped. The truth stuck in her throat. Daniel's gaze didn't waver. "Don't tell me what you think I want to hear. Tell me the truth. Are you really happy? Or have you just been pretending for my sake?" The room seemed to shrink around her. The ticking clock grew louder, her coffee gone cold in its cup. No one had asked her that in years, not since her husband's funeral. When sympathetic neighbors would pat her hand and say, "You'll be okay, right?" she had always smiled and nodded because it was easier than letting them see the storm inside down. Faced with her son's piercing honesty, Emma felt stripped bare. She tried to force a smile. "I've had a good life, Daniel. I'm proud of you. That's enough for me." But Daniel shook his head. "No, Mom, that's not what I asked. I'm asking about you. Not me, not the sacrifices, not the memories you. Right now, do you ever wake up excited? Do you feel love in your heart? Something that belongs only to you?" Emma's breath hitched. She couldn't answer, not without unraveling the fragile shield she had built for years. She stared down at her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Daniel's voice softened, but his words cut even deeper. "I see it in your eyes every morning when you think I'm not looking. You're tired. You're lonely. And sometimes I think you've forgotten how to hope. I can't stand to see you live like that." Her throat burned with unshed tears. She wanted to protest, to tell him he was wrong, but every word he spoke rang true. The silence she carried at night, the way she envied couples she saw holding hands in town, the ache that grew stronger every time she sat alone in her chair by the window, all of it was real. Emma finally whispered, "Why now? Why are you asking me this today?" Daniel took a long breath, his jaw tightening. "Because I can't ignore it anymore. I've been watching you fade piece by piece while pretending nothing's wrong. And I don't want to wake up one day and realize you never got the chance to live for yourself again. You deserve more than a quiet house and old memories. You deserve love, Mom. You deserve to feel alive." Her chest ached with emotions she had buried too deep for too long. She shook her head faintly. "It's been years, Daniel. I wouldn't even know where to begin." "And let that be your beginning," he urged. "Admitting it. Saying out loud that you still want more. That's the first step." Emma's tears finally slipped free, warm against her cheeks. She hated crying in front of him, but she couldn't hold them back anymore. His words were too honest, too full of love to dismiss. He wasn't asking out of pity. He was asking because he believed in her in a way she had forgotten how to. Believe in herself. Daniel's hand moved across the table, resting gently on hers. His touch was steady, grounding. I don't need you to answer me right now, he said softly, but I need you to think about it. Really think. Are you happy? Or is there a part of you that still longs for something you've been too afraid to admit? Emma's voice trembled as she whispered, "What if I say yes? What if I admit I want more and it's already too late for me?" Daniel's grip on her hand tightened, his expression fierce with tenderness. "Then I'll remind you every day until you believe it's not too late. Because it isn't, not for you." The air between them grew heavy, charged with the unspoken. Emma felt her chest rising and falling too quickly, her heart struggling to steady itself. She realized she was afraid not of her son's question, but of the truth it uncovered inside her. She wasn't happy. Not fully. Not in the way she wanted. And now, after all these years, she could no longer pretend otherwise. She lifted her eyes to him, her tears still shining. "Daniel, I don't even know if I remember how to dream that way anymore." He smiled faintly, though his eyes glistened. "Then let me help you remember. You taught me how to live. Now it's my turn to help you." The sincerity in his words shook her to her core. She had expected many things that morning: small talk, a quick goodbye, the usual rhythm of their days. But never this. Never her son daring to ask her the question she had avoided for so long. "Are you truly happy?" And though she could not answer him yet, she knew one thing for certain. The safe, quiet life she had accepted as final no longer felt the same. Her son's honesty had lit a spark in the ashes of her heart. And whether she wanted to or not, she would have to face the truth it revealed. Emma sat frozen, her son's words circling her mind like echoes she could not silence. The kitchen felt smaller, as if the walls had leaned in closer, pressing her toward an answer she wasn't ready to give. The sunlight spilled across the table, catching the silver strands in her hair. And for the first time in years, she felt exposed not as a mother, not as a widow, but as a woman who still carried quiet dreams inside her. Daniel didn't rush her. Kay stayed still, his hand resting gently on hers, his eyes steady and patient. That small act of waiting spoke louder than any lecture. It told her he was willing to sit in her silence, willing to let her search through the pieces of her heart without judgment. Finally, Emma drew in a long breath. "Daniel," she whispered, "I've lived so long telling myself I was fine. I thought if I just kept busy, kept being your mother, the ache would fade. But it hasn't. It's still there." Her voice cracked and she closed her eyes, ashamed of the confession. But Daniel squeezed her hand, grounding her. "That's not weakness, Mom. That's honesty. And it's the bravest thing you've said in a long time." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but this time she didn't try to stop them. She let them fall, cleansing years of silence. "I miss being seen," she admitted, her words trembling. "Not as a parent, not as someone who keeps everything together, but as a woman. I miss laughter in the evenings, conversations that make time disappear. I miss the feeling of being loved." Her son's expression softened, his eyes shimmering with emotion. "Then it's time to stop pretending those feelings are gone. You're allowed to want that again?" Emma's heart twisted. "But what if it's too late? What if love doesn't come twice in a lifetime?" Daniel leaned closer, his voice low but firm. "It's never too late. You taught me that. You always told me life has seasons, and every season has its own kind of beauty. Why can't you believe that for yourself?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. His words pierced her defenses, pulling down walls she had carefully built over the years. Slowly, she realized he wasn't just speaking as her son. He was speaking as someone who saw her clearly. Someone who cared enough to push her toward the life she had almost given up on. For a long moment, the only sound was the clock ticking on the wall. Emma stared at the window, at the faint outline of the trees outside. The world looked the same, yet she felt as if everything inside her had shifted. When she turned back to Daniel, her face was wet with tears, but her eyes carried a light he hadn't seen in years. "You're right," she said softly. "I've been hiding, been surviving, not living, but maybe I don't have to keep doing that." A smile broke across Daniel's face, gentle but filled with relief. "It's all I wanted, Mom, for you to see that it's still possible." Her chest felt lighter, though fragile, like the first breath after a long storm. "It scares me," she admitted. "The thought of opening my heart again, of hoping, it feels dangerous." "Course it does," Daniel said, his voice kind. "Anything worth having feels that way. But fear means you care. It means there's something waiting for you on the other side." Emma's lips trembled, caught between a laugh and a sob. For the first time in years, she felt the stir of something she thought she had lost hope. It was faint, delicate, but alive. Her son had pulled it out of the shadows, and now it glowed in the quiet space between them. She reached across the table, holding his hand tighter. "You've given me something today I didn't think I'd ever feel again. You've given me permission to dream." Daniel's smile grew warmer. "No, Mom, I didn't give it to you. It was already there. You just needed someone to remind you." Emma exhaled slowly, her tears drying on her cheeks. She thought of the years she had spent hiding behind routine, convincing herself she had no right to want more. But this morning her son's honesty had cracked that lie wide open. And in its place was the possibility of a new chapter, one she had been too afraid to write. For the first time in so long, she let herself imagine it, meeting someone new, sharing stories, laughing under the glow of a warm evening, feeling the rush of being seen and cherished again. It wasn't a promise, not yet. But it was a door she had kept locked, and now she felt the key in her hand. Emma looked at Daniel, her eyes soft but stronger than before. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear. "Thank you for seeing me when I had forgotten how to see myself." He nodded, his face shining with quiet pride. "Always, Mom, always." The kitchen grew silent again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It's peaceful, filled with something new, a quiet understanding that the future still held possibilities. Emma felt a shift deep inside her chest, like the first signs of spring after a long winter. She knew the journey wouldn't be easy. She would have doubts. She would have fears. But the seed of change had been planted, and it was enough to make her believe again. As the morning slipped into day, Emma rose from the table with a steadiness she hadn't felt in years. She carried her empty cup to the sink, glancing at her reflection in the window. She looked older, yes, but also different, softer, braver, alive. And for the first time in a long time, she whispered to herself, "My story isn't over." Daniel stood behind her, watching her with quiet pride. And Emma knew that this morning, the morning her son's honest expression pierced through her silence, would be the day she remembered for the rest of her life. It wasn't just another morning. It was the beginning of her change of heart.